Imagine you're running a health plan for 820,000 people. You're responsible for $7 billion in taxpayer money. In order to protect that money, you put a straightforward protection in the contract. Your carrier has to charge you whichever is less of what the healthcare provider actually builds or their pre negotiated rate. It's called the lesser of provision. Now imagine discovering that your carrier has been doing the exact opposite. That's what my guest today discovered. Her findings led to a lawsuit and a $100 million settlement between the state of New Jersey and the Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield. But this story isn't just about New Jersey. If you're a self insured employer, you'll want to sit up and pay attention because if this could happen to a government health plan with lawyers, auditors, and subpoena power, what's happening at your company right now? Today, I'm talking with Chris Deacon. Chris was running one of the largest health plans in the country, New Jersey's public sector health plans. She was responsible for protecting billions in public money. It was her job to make sure the numbers added up. And when she realized they didn't, she had to make a call. Keep it quiet, keep her job, or blow the whistle and risk everything. She chose the whistle. Today, Chris runs her own consulting firm working with health plans and employers. She's also the author of The Great American Healthcare Heist, which breaks down exactly how the healthcare industry makes its money by keeping employers in the dark. Chris, welcome to Healthcare Rebuilt. Before we get into the Horizon case, help people understand your background. You were a lawyer by training. How'd you end up running one of the largest public health plans in America?
Yeah, so I didn't, sort of start my career thinking I would end up in healthcare. It really started when I went to the Attorney General's office with the state of New Jersey and was a deputy AG there for several years, where I started working on the state health benefits program matters and actually counseled some of the committees and commissions. I then went to the governor's office for a year in the last tenure of the Christie administration and then was asked to stay on in the Department of Treasury. And that's where I got my start with the SHBP and running a massive health plan.
Yeah, it's always funny how our careers kind of take that path to get to where we landed. The fact that you were in Treasury, which then was overseeing the transactions in the health plan. That's as a banker makes my heart feel good. One of the things as I was reading about this case, and it continues to blow my mind. But I think as we were talking beforehand, I always tell folks my time was in banking. I consider myself a tourist after 5.5 years. You are a citizen of this place. And I mean, just frame up. You're overseeing this massive health plan, responsible to the taxpayers, 30 public sector unions. What was your relationship with Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield supposed to look like, and what were they contracted to do as you were getting into this role?
Yeah, so I mean, they were our third party administrator for years. This state health benefits program has never not had Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield as their third party administrator. We did strike a new contract with them in 2020 after a competitive RFP process. But that contract really had some much more stringent terms, a lot more accountability. And, ultimately, I think those sort of the changes in those terms are what ultimately led to, at least for me, a soured relationship as time went on because of, some of the things in the contract that weren't being complied with.
And these are complex contracts because I mean, what is the number, like the monetary number we're talking about for the entire plan? Just so folks can get their heads wrapped around this concept.
Yeah, from a budget perspective, the plan, paid, close to $7 billion in healthcare expenses a year. So it's not an insubstantial amount of money. Um, from, just pure admin fees, administrative fees, that is supposed to be the sole income derived by Horizon Blue Cross Blue
Right.
Shield is about 130, million in a given year, depending on how many members and the membership. So a lot of fees, definitely, but a lot of money flowing through those third party contracts that Horizon is supposed to be negotiating on our behalf.
Yeah, one of the things I always like to remind folks is that when we look at the monetary transactions in the healthcare space, you're talking 7.5 billion. There's some states like Texas are 55 billion. Then you start getting into the overall, as I always say, the 5 trillion, right? So we're talking large amount of money moving around in this system. So we would want to make sure that all of that is being allocated correctly, spent correctly, and sent correctly. So now take me to that moment because, by the way, as a banker, I've had a few of these in my career. When you first realize the math was not mathing, what made you stop and say, hey, wait a second, something is not correct here?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few different moments because, there were sort of several components to the contract that were problematic, some of which have been publicly documented, like failure to provide certain services. And that, what sort of triggered my awareness there is just a lack of the outcome, the financial outcome we were looking for. But with respect to the conduct that was directly at issue in the $100 million settlement, I happened to be looking at a claim file of our 50 largest claims outside of the state of New Jersey and saw massive amounts of money being paid out by the plan that shouldn't be. In fact, it was so massive that I actually thought it was a mistake or I was reading the file wrong at first glance, but I was assured that was actually correct. And obviously that sort of led down a path of trying to unravel and uncover just how big a problem this was.
So it's like that blink moment, like Gladwell would say, is that moment where you just saw it and you go, something's not correct. What was the first thing after you got past? Is it right or is it incorrect? Like what number popped out at you when you first were looking at this?
Yeah, the first line of this file showed a bill for a billed amount of $675,000 roughly, from a New York Presbyterian claim.
So we're talking over a half a million dollars.
Right. But that billed amount, that's the sticker price. What we actually paid, the plan paid column showed over 2.1 million. And so that's the blink moment, right? And my next steps were again sort of I questioned my own sanity a little bit. So being sort of the lawyer, I wanted to do my fact discovery first because if I was to come, sort of with the allegation that something this big is happening, I wanted to make sure I had my ducks in a row. And so that's sort of where I went from there. Eventually, I think they knew, Houston, we have a problem. We've been found out. But, we're talking in 50 claims alone, we had paid 12 million over what we should have paid. And that's
Hey,
50 claims.
what were your first steps? Did you reach out to Horizon to talk to them first? Did you talk internally, address it with maybe it was a process breakdown? Walk us through that. Walk us through that maze.
Yeah. So again, knowing that there was this big of a spread in between those numbers, and again, not just that claim just happens to be the example I'm
Okay.
using. I wanted to validate what the plan actually paid because the column is saying 2.1 million, but I want to make sure that, via further discovery that that's actually what the plan paid. So what we ended up doing was pulling the corresponding explanations of benefits, de-identified, but so that we could look at, if you remember, if you're one of the ones that looks at your explanations of benefits, it does have the billed amount, the allowed amount, and the plan paid amount. And what we saw in the explanations of benefits was an, you know, either an incorrect number or a correct number, and we were missing $1.3 million. So in that example I just gave, the plan paid amount was $675,000. So which is it, right? Is the EOB right, which by the way is a document that's being sent out in the mail in mass, right? Is that right? Or is the file right? And from there, yes, approaching Horizon because it, you get to a point where you think there's no way that this could be happening on such a massive scale because if this were any other industry, like we're talking orange jumpsuit territory, right? It's healthcare.
As a banker, like again, the whole concept of what I've seen as a banker, you're 100% right. As I said before, whether it was the Change Healthcare hack a year or so ago, or things like this, when I'm on the Hill, I remind folks if this was JPMC, if this was City, you would have a Jamie Dimon up here in 30 seconds or less. It just would be the case, right? Which is just mind-boggling to me. So you're seeing this, you wanna make sure the processes are in place. The math is truly not mathing at this point. You're ensuring that you're gonna start raising it up. And, just to remind everybody, something that Chris said is very important because those folks at home who aren't in the industry, we talk about explanation of benefits. We all get them, and you go, "Hey, maybe I read them." I do read them now 'cause I'm a nerd. But you said bill them out, allow them out, and paid them out. A normal human being would see those 3 numbers and not know what's going on. So it feels to me as I've been on this journey, this industry creates calcification and confusion. And so is that what you run up against? Is that there's this labyrinth of explanations and definitions that that could possibly have been the reason why was this taking place? Or was there something else happening inside the business processes of Horizon that were creating this?
Yeah, I mean, your point about does anybody really read it? And that was their response, right? Like, what's the harm here if we're saying 675,000 instead of the 2.1 million? That would just be confusing. And it's like it's confusing because it's wrong, right? If I happen to be one of those nerds or people that actually does pay attention and I'm seeing a $675,000 bill being paid out at $2.1 million, dollars, if I'm a public sector employee who's just had their rates go up 20%, I might be paying attention, right? And I might raise that as a flag. But the sort of approach from Horizon was that, we don't want to confuse people. It would confuse them if we showed anything else. So we've programmed it to only ever show the plan paid amount.
Again, it's that confusion that makes it hard. And so as you were starting to bring this up to superiors, right? And folks in the administration, because here, as you know, in the United States, we talk about healthcare all the time. What was the things you ran into? Were there political dynamics? Were there industry dynamics? What were the things that you smashed into when you were saying, this does not look correct to me?
I think all of the above. I mean, it was a big brick wall made up of, politics and the leadership and administration and the industry. Now, consider that this was one of many issues that had been raised at the time. And so it was a piece of, an approach that we were, again, I had raised internally. We had a big meeting. In fact, it was the first big meeting in person in Trenton because we
Mm,
were just sort of coming out of COVID. And we were going to, at least talk through all of these issues and how we were going to try and find um, a resolution and whether that was compensation back to the state or, an action plan to correct things going forward. But, I think this meeting actually is the opening story in my book. um, in that one meeting, we were playing not hardball, but we have a really good case. We've set forth the facts. We've got all of corporate, on the other side of the table. And, with the last 5 minutes, suddenly the governor decides to drop by unannounced, not invited, and proceeds to sort of work his way down the the horizon side of the table with backslapping and, I love
mm,
this guy and, their government affairs guy who apparently he's very close with got a hug. I didn't get a handshake. And that's fine. I don't expect to be acknowledged. That's totally fine. But there was definitely a disparity in the way the way the two groups were approached.
yeah.
And upon exiting, sort of saying like, "Let's figure this out. We can make this essentially go away." And when we left that meeting, I know that the wind was just taken out of our sails. And I remember having a conversation with our contract manager at Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, who also shared that, when they walked out of that room, they were flabbergasted at how sort of undercut we were in our attempt to bring some accountability.
And that's what makes this whole $5 trillion situation in the United States so challenging is the interconnectivity of all the relationships. So that would have been the moment in the movie when they zoom in on you, right? In that moment, and that's when the wheels started going, saying, "Houston, I think back to your statement, we have a problem here." All right, so at that point, right, you've tried to work through all of the different ways to bring this up, escalate it, and come to a remediation. I'm assuming here Horizon was forthcoming and looking for a constructive way to interact. He says tongue in cheek. And so then you make the decision to say, hey, look, I can't affect change on the inside. I have to affect the change on the outside. What drove that thinking? What made you get to that bottom line that says the only way that we're going to make a difference here is I have to go outside the system?
Yeah, so, I continued to push after that meeting. I went and asked for more claims in order to further expand our looking into this particular issue. We wanted to pursue the cease there's another contract compliance complaint alleged, and we wanted to continue pursuing that. And I was pushing, and I realized I was out there pushing alone. It got to a point where I know that I had private text messages that were between myself and our contract manager at Horizon and internally that were being shared with the governor's office and the chief of staff. And I
Mm,
felt like I'm getting a little close to the fire,
right,
and was told at one point, look, Horizon is going to be our partner, and there's a lot of other things you can do here. That's something you're going to have to live with and move on. And I wasn't willing to look the other way.
once you made the decision to raise this up in a public forum, um, what was the plans that went through your head? I know that as part of the whistleblower activity, there were 5 other folks I think involved as well. So tell me about the plan and the thinking of like, hey, I'm actually going to go on the journey because for those who don't know, this is not an easy path. You could have chosen an easy path, right? You could have chosen something just to get along or go focus on that other thing, right?
Right. So, at that point, I had really no intention of bringing a whistleblower complaint. I mean, I certainly thought, how can I continue to bring this to light as a New Jersey taxpayer and as somebody that cares? But was eventually put in touch with some folks from the Police Benevolence Association who are part of the lawsuit who had, unfortunately, I can't get into the details of the actual whistleblower complaint, which has yet to be unsealed, but they brought some stuff to my attention that really expanded the scope of what was going on that wasn't right. And at
Yeah.
that point, we found what we thought to be one of the most reputable attorneys in the space and who knew that this case had a lot of merit. And it was filed. And again, from a procedural perspective, the state's complaint has been unsealed and was part of the settlement. But the whistleblower's complaint is actually still under seal and the subject of a motion, or will be, as we understand it, the subject of a motion to remain sealed, which
Right.
is a pretty high bar, but, we're gonna fight to make sure it's out there and in the open because to me, like, that's why that's why I filed this, was to
Right.
get some sunlight in it. And so I'm hopeful that, that will happen and the entirety of the complaint will be unsealed.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I think this industry would really benefit from is having folks become educated like you on how these processes work, and then also walk through what is really happening under the waterline, right? So folks have a fairly good understanding about their credit card, they understand pretty good about their checking. We need to do that same activity. So because again, the mentality in the US, as you know well, is I go to the doctor, I get these weird documents, they explain really weird stuff. I just know I pay a copay and then I pay out of my monthly check. But if they actually understood, and this is as I say all the time, this $5 trillion is 5 times our national defense budget. And we don't put the same sort of criticality on it as we do the $1 trillion we spend for military spending. So as you went through, it sounds like there was a settlement in place. How did the phase one of this with Horizon come to a closure?
Yeah, well, so the original complaint was filed in late 2021 and the amended complaint was filed in 2022. So that was our complaint and the one is that remains under seal. And, the way these things work is uh there were federal dollars at stake,
Mhm.
so it's in a federal court. There is federal jurisdiction. We've been interviewed, and I've been interviewed multiple times by both the feds and the state AG's office, which then that investigation took a very long time.
Right.
Too long, in my opinion, especially given, um, in my opinion, the lack of complexity of the matter that they ultimately settled on. But we were We gave extension after extension, trying to be cooperative. And, you know, come November 2025, finally, the state AG's office officially intervenes. They file their complaint and they've agreed upon, $100 million settlement to release all of the conduct.
Wow. So, $100 million, a lot of money, very, very clearly a lot of money. But again, we're talking about, fees of $133 million for 1 year. We're talking other things in that price arbitrage you were talking about going on there. So it's a percentage of, I think, was probably a bigger number if I kind of use my banker brain to kind of do the mathematics. Absolutely amazing. And Horizon is still there. There's still the vendor, and they're still providing the service to the state government, correct?
Yes. And in fact, the contract was rebid during the time of the investigation, and they were actually awarded a 4-year contract, which is very unique in the public sector. Especially this contract has always been 3 years plus one plus one,
Right.
and this was actually 4 years plus one plus one. So in the midst of this, they were awarded another contract, and as part of the settlement agreement, the state cannot consider the covered conduct or the settlement in future evaluations. So it cannot be a black mark upon them when evaluating them for future contracts.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And again, if you wouldn't have brought this to light, no one would have known this was going on. And it doesn't feel like this is unique in this industry whatsoever. A banker, I've seen enough things where a process, has been there for so long, society, the market changes, and then it has to be corrected. For example, in banking back in 2005, charging interest on interest, right? The industry came and said, "Look, this is not a good practice. I know it was allowed, but we need to remove that." And so the market kind of moved. Is that what was happening here? The market kind of moved, or do you think this was just ingrained business practices, and this is what happened within this company and within this plan and within this state?
Yeah, I think that it's an ingrained business practice. And this is not unique to Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield. But in this particular case, there wasn't, at least according to the Attorney General, there was an understanding on their part. They were they were not complying, and they were willing to roll those dice and hope nobody noticed. And unfortunately somebody did. And I think that that's one of the issue with this $5 trillion industry is there are very blurry lines, and they take it up to the line and often cross it. And if they get caught crossing it, they'll put the cookie back in the cookie jar, so to speak. But
Half eaten.
there are no ramifications beyond that.
Which again, that is the thing that I have seen across this industry, right? Is that in banking, again, for all the right reasons, we made mistakes and we are held accountable very publicly. In this industry, I don't see that take place quite as often. So from your seat, from your experience, both inside the program and then being a citizen who's coming to the outside, trying to shine a light on what was going on here to make things better, because that's your intent to make things better. Why would a CFO of a self-insured company, really care about this? Why do the unions really care about this? Make it real for folks to understand that this is affecting them too.
Right. So I think number one, that CFO needs to understand that, we have been told a lie that you never pay the sticker price, right? Don't pay attention to the sticker price. Don't pay attention to the bill. We get you a negotiated discount and it is always going to be better. That is wrong,
Right.
right? And you cannot allow for them to sort of give you an aggregate number and say, yes, but you win overall, right? You need to know that you are not getting the sticker price. Oftentimes,
Right.
you're paying 2 or 3 times the sticker price, and that's a problem. Just understanding that sort of out of the gate. And then number 2, I think the other behavior here that is maybe perhaps most problematic is the willingness to roll the dice in not complying with a contract in the hopes of not getting caught, right? Think of that as industry standard, which I actually think it is. With a lot of, or if it's in gray area, we'll go there, and if we get caught, maybe we'll put the cookies back, or, going forward, we'll fix it. I think that's probably the most problematic piece of this because it happens every day. And you cannot just trust, like, you have to verify. You cannot assume that they're acting in your best interest. You have to assume that they're out there trying to make money, right? Just like you're trying to save it. And oftentimes, you need to be pretty assertive with your auditing. Like you said, in the financial world, writing a $25 million check every day, which is what the state of New Jersey does on a daily basis, $25 million in claims are paid. You know what the sort of financial controls in place for that was? Like, when we audited ourselves, it was to make sure that the amount requested was correct, meaning, like, if they requested 25,530,000, that we were correct in transferring that amount by 11 a.m.
That
And if
that
we
was the
did that,
control.
we were good.
That's the control. They told us it was 25 million. Just make sure that goes out the door, right? Which again makes my head explode because inside of banking, it's yes, the numbers have to reconcile at the top line, but we always have to make all the numbers down the line reconcile so we can go back and to the penny and say the transaction was X. That's what we transacted against, which is it amazes me here what takes place this
And the
in this
crazy
market.
part is, what makes it crazier is that this, it is possible. It is
Yeah.
not impossible to reconcile down to the penny. In today's world, we have the tools. We are just not using them because we know what we will see.
Yeah, the example I always give everyone is around credit card transactions. You can go from your home in Texas, you can go to Singapore, you can get on a plane, get a hotel and a dinner, and I can do this all in real time and reconcile to your account to the penny every day within microseconds. And so the thing that blows my mind. And the other thing that you were describing earlier is the short pay. You're doing it on a grand scale, but short pay, what shocked me about this industry is short pay is the insurance companies that provide the payers will say, "Hey, it's $100 for this activity." They charge the self-insured employer or the state $100. The doctor then comes in and charges $65. Well, the client still pays the payer, the insurance company, the $100. The doctor does not get the 65, and in some cases, actually gets 35. And that is a normal practice in this world, which again just makes my head explode and blow up every time I hear it. So, folks, that's the sort of stuff that we need to start getting to as a country in the details. So, Chris, here's my last one because you've been great hanging with us on this entire time. You have a magic wand, right? You've been in the battle. You know what it looks like down in the trenches, right? How would you make healthcare act based on what you've seen and based on your experience of having to fight the fight and try to bring this to the outside world?
I think the most important thing directionally that we need to start to move towards is moving the provider, the patient, and the purchaser, meaning whomever is paying for it, as close to each other as possible in the transaction. And what does that mean? Like, in real time? That means that we need to remove the 27 intermediaries that come between, right, that provider and that patient and purchaser. Because today, almost all of our solutions are just adding another layer inside of this. But and I know that the financial rails exist today to pay for healthcare the way that we pay for other services and goods. And yes, I recognize that healthcare is not groceries, and I recognize that healthcare is not gas. But I also recognize that healthcare is still something that we need to pay for in a auditable, traceable manner. And so, yeah, if that can be our driving philosophy, is how to start peeling back those middle layers. And we'll never get to a place where they're touching. But the closer we can get to direct contracts, right? Direct contracting with, employers and hospitals. We need our hospitals. We need hospitals that are financially viable. We don't want our hospital to get 65 cents on that dollar that we think we're paying it, right? Think about that. How much more could our hospitals make or be financially viable, and we would be happier if we were paying them 85? We both win. That's the direction.
I'd say preach, my friend, because everything you nailed. The reason I left banking, the sole reason I left banking in my advanced career was exactly what you're talking about. Is it's a calcified market, and if we made it less calcified, more efficient, and again, you're right. Buying healthcare is not buying groceries, but it shouldn't take as long as it does at the level of reconciliation it does. It's not that hard. I tell folks banks do complex transactions every second of every day. And if we followed that framework, right? And again, we learned the lessons the hard way. We've made mistakes. We had to take accountability and resolve it. And that's what we should do here because it's a calcified market and it's actually been made calcified on purpose, which I hope people, when they hear this podcast, they actually truly understand and they actually go give your book a read. And what I would say to folks in my observation as a tourist the last 5.5 years, this is not rare. This is actually the norm of what you see. Well, Chris, thanks for sharing your story. I know it wasn't easy to risk your career to expose this. And what you've shown us today is pretty clear that if a government health plan with all of its resources can get systematically overcharged, the rest of us need to wake up and ask harder questions of our policymakers, of those who actually engage in providing the health care, and how we pay for it. We're going to have Chris back, by the way, to go over her book, which is the Great American Healthcare Heist. Which, by the way, I love it. Invokes that whole 1920s people walking into a bank. And we'll dig into the whole system, how it works, hospitals, PBMs, carriers, and why is it designed to keep employers paying while getting less. And it's an episode you won't want to miss. Again, that's that calcification, guys. We got to break it. So, Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you, man. For show notes and more, visit nomihealth.com. Until next time, this is Healthcare Rebuilt.